Ever since my dad invited me on his next business trip, my mind had been a whirlwind of confusion and curiosity. The revelation of his double life had turned everything I knew on its head. Yet, here I was, packing a bag to join him, driven by a desperate need for answers. The night before we were set to leave, I couldn't sleep. My room, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cell, trapping me with my swirling thoughts. Was I making a mistake? What if this trip revealed things I wasn't ready to face? But the need to understand, to see for myself what Dad was involved in, outweighed my fears. Morning came with a grey, overcast sky, mirroring the turmoil inside me. Dad was already downstairs, his bag packed, looking every bit the business traveller in his crisp suit. Except now, I knew the suitcase held more than just clothes and a laptop. "Ready, kiddo?" he asked, his voice betraying none of the tension I felt. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, let's go." The drive to the airport was quiet. Dad made small talk, but I could barely focus, my mind racing with questions I dared not ask. What kind of world was I stepping into? Would I come back the same? We boarded the plane, and as it took off, I watched the ground fall away, feeling a part of me detach, leaving behind the innocence I still clung to. The flight was long, giving me too much time to think. I watched my father, studying him. He seemed at ease, reading through reports and answering emails. It struck me then how little I actually knew about him. The man sitting next to me was a stranger in many ways, his life a mystery I was about to unravel. We landed in a city that felt a world away from home. The air was warmer, the streets busier. Dad led the way with a confidence that suggested he'd done this many times before. We took a taxi to a hotel that was luxurious yet discreet, the kind of place that catered to those who preferred to stay unnoticed. After checking in, Dad turned to me. "You'll have some time to yourself while I'm at meetings. We'll talk more tonight." I nodded, watching him leave. Alone in my room, I felt a wave of isolation. What was I doing here? This was my father's world, not mine. But then, I remembered the nights I'd lain awake, haunted by the secrets I'd uncovered. I needed to see this through, for better or worse. The day passed in a blur of restless thoughts. I wandered the city, but the sights and sounds barely registered. My mind was back at the hotel, imagining the conversations Dad was having, the deals being made. When he returned, it was with an air of satisfaction. "All set for tomorrow," he said, as we ate dinner in the hotel's restaurant. "You'll see how we operate. It's not what you think." I wanted to believe him, to find some explanation that would make everything all right. But the doubt lingered, a shadow I couldn't shake. The next day, Dad took me to a nondescript building in a part of the city that felt far removed from the tourist-filled streets. Inside, it was like stepping into another world. Men and women moved with purpose, their conversations low and serious. There was an air of tension, of stakes higher than I could imagine. Dad introduced me to a few people, their names slipping from my memory as soon as they were spoken. They looked at me with a mix of curiosity and caution, clearly wondering why I was there. Then I was led into a meeting room. The discussion was about security for a high-profile event, the details of which were both mundane and chilling. They talked about threats and countermeasures with a casualness that was jarring. This was Dad's world, a place where danger was a constant companion, and life was a chess game played with real pieces. As the day went on, I saw more. Deals were made, strategies formed, I watched my father, seeing him in a new light. He was respected, feared even. His words carried weight, his decisions shaping outcomes in ways I couldn't fully understand. By the time we returned to the hotel, my head was spinning. The world I'd glimpsed was complex, layered with shades of grey I hadn't known existed. Dad was part of it, woven into the fabric of this hidden society. That night we talked, really talked. Dad shared stories of his life, the choices he'd made. He spoke of protection, of doing what was necessary to keep us safe. It was a justification, perhaps, but in his voice I heard the weight of the burden he carried. "I never wanted this for you," he said, his gaze meeting mine. "But I needed you to understand, to see the truth for yourself." I listened, the pieces of the puzzle slowly fitting together. The man I'd seen today was still my dad, but he was also someone else, someone shaped by a world I was only beginning to understand. As I lay in bed that night, the city's lights a distant glow, I realized this trip was only the beginning. My journey into my father's world had opened doors I could never close, revealing truths I could no longer ignore. I was no longer just the observer, the kid left in the dark. I was a part of this now, for better or worse, and as the shadows of doubt lingered, I knew one thing for certain: my life would never be the same again. The process of being woven into the fabric of my father's life was both exhilarating and terrifying. I was introduced as his assistant, a role that granted me access to the fringes of his operations. I observed, learned, and slowly began to understand the gravity of his work. It wasn't just about making deals or providing security. It was about balancing on the knife edge of legality and morality, protecting something bigger than ourselves. One afternoon, as we navigated through a maze of back alleys to a nondescript warehouse, Dad explained the nature of our visit. We're ensuring that a shipment gets to its destination without interference. It's crucial for our client's operations, he said, his tone casual, as if discussing a routine delivery. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Men and women moved with a silent efficiency, their eyes sharp and assessing. Dad was in his element, issuing commands with a calm authority that was obeyed without question. Watching him, I felt a mix of pride and unease. This was my father, respected and feared, a man who commanded the shadows. The relative calm of our operations was shattered one evening. A rival group, looking to disrupt our client's network, launched a surprise attack. The warehouse we had visited just days before was targeted, thrusting us into a scene of chaos and violence, with bullets snapping beside us. Dad's response was immediate and decisive. He coordinated our defenses, his voice a steady beacon amidst the storm. I was by his side, no longer just an observer, but an active participant in the defense of our territory. The lines between right and wrong blurred as I followed his orders, the adrenaline masking my fear. In the aftermath, as we surveyed the damage and counted our losses, the reality of my father's world settled heavily on my shoulders. We had protected our interests. The dead faces of those caught in the crossfire haunted me, a stark reminder of the life and death stakes we played with. I had stepped into my father's world willingly, seeking answers and understanding. But now, faced with the consequences of our actions, I questioned my place in this shadowy realm. Was I prepared to cross the lines my father had, to make the sacrifices he deemed necessary? One evening, as we sat in the quiet of our hotel room, the weight of my thoughts must have shown. Dad looked at me, his eyes softening. It's not easy, I know. You think you're ready, but it's the choices, the ones you have to live with, that test you, he said, his voice tinged with regret. We talked long into the night, Dad sharing stories of his past, the decisions that had led him to this life. It wasn't justification or an attempt to sway me. It was an acknowledgement of the complexity of our existence, the grey areas we navigated daily. That conversation marked a turning point. I began to see my father not just as a figure of authority or a man shrouded in mystery, but as a person, flawed and conflicted, yet driven by a sense of duty and love. Our relationship evolved, the barriers built by years of secrets and silence crumbling as we faced the darkness together. In the days that followed, I took a more active role in our operations. My tasks no longer limited to observation. I was making decisions, influencing outcomes, and with each choice I felt myself drifting further from the person I had been. As we prepared to return home, the city that had been the backdrop to our journey seemed different, as if I was seeing it through new eyes. The experience had changed me, reshaping my understanding of my father, his world, and my place within it. The flight home was quiet, both of us lost in our thoughts. The distance between us had closed, but a new space had opened, filled with the shared knowledge of the darkness we'd faced. Landing back home, the familiar sights and sounds felt strangely foreign. I had left seeking answers, and while I had found some, I returned with even more questions. Questions about my father, about myself, and about the path I would choose moving forward. Dad broke the silence as we drove home. You don't have to decide anything right now. Just know that whatever path you choose, I'm here for you, he said, his voice steady. I nodded, grateful for the offer, even as I knew the decision was mine alone to make. The journey into the heart of darkness had ended, but a new journey was just beginning. As we pulled into the driveway, the house looming before us, a sense of resolve settled over me. The future was uncertain, but the sense of accomplishment, the power, the urge, it was intoxicating. I met the gaze of my father and smiled, gently caressing the pistol in the holster at my hip. Thank you, Father. I am yours to command. Now and forever.